Hillary McBride, I am so delighted to be connected with you, partly because this has taken perhaps 7 months. You have a full schedule, and my son broke his hand. And so our last meeting, you were sitting there going, guys, hi. And I'm like, I'm so sorry, I'm in the hospital. And so we rescheduled, but it's just brilliant to be here with you.
I'm so glad we're here. Even just the sheer fact that it has taken so long, anything that takes so long, it feels so satisfying when it happens.
So satisfying. And look, I had 2 planes to catch to get back to Auckland, New Zealand yesterday, and one of the planes is quite unreliable. And I was like, please fly on time. Please let us make our connection. And I mean, it did give me more reading time because I have just finished re-dipping into and the last chapters of The Wisdom of Your Body, which is a revolutionary book for me. So I am honestly, I just can't believe how are we even going to begin to get through all that I want to discuss with you and ask you about today. But can I guess I wanted to talk of support and honour the work that you are doing in terms of inviting women back into their bodies. And I've read some of your metaphors, and I guess I want to acknowledge that today, everything we're talking about, whether we're talking about society or ideology or our ways of being or health, that what we want to do, what I'd love to do is center those conversations in our bodies, that we are talking about our bodies and how we live in and through them, and that the body is the vessel for our conversation today. So who better to talk to than you about that? Can I ask
where we're
you?
Going.
Yeah, you've done like 5 books, which I'll rave about. But your PhD was about menopause as metamorphosis. Can you talk to me a little bit about your PhD and what you discovered?
Yes. Thank you. These are not things that people regularly get asked in academia. Like, tell me about your research. Like, I've been waiting for someone to ask. Thank you. So how I came to this topic was actually at the suggestion of my doctoral research supervisor, who, she had been studying women's relationships with their bodies, fertility, kind of across the lifespan. And my work up until that point in my research career had been about how we are embodied, kind of what happens to our relationship to our bodies as women across the lifespan. And they hadn't looked at that in perimenopause or menopause yet. And so it was really her suggestion to say, hey, why don't we go in this direction? Because if it's not immediately clear, I'm actually not there yet in my stage of life. And so there's something about that it hadn't really crossed my mind as something to research. And I think that actually says something about how, as women, we approach perimenopause. It's not really something we even think about. It happens to older women. It happens to other women. It happens, and then all of a sudden it's happened. It's one of these really strange things in life that really menopause seems to only have happened when we're on the other side of it. And yet you can't really, it's like kind of hard to imagine thinking about pregnancy or birth that way, or even puberty, right? Like, where'd this baby come from? I had no idea, right? Like, those are
that happens, bizarre. But we go, how did she not know? Exactly. Like, it's a magazine-worthy story, right? If you don't know you're pregnant.
Yeah, and so this is such a...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, we haven't talked about it as a society. It hasn't been a topic of discussion until recently.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what is happening, is that as women, there's a chasm, there's a deafening silence around our education, our discourse, our access to information, our access to resources which are empowering and transformational. So when we start to look at menopause and we start to look at kind of what the literature says about it, how women feel about menopause, it seems like there's a couple different themes that come up. And just generally speaking, the idea is that menopause, by and large, I would say in North America, I imagine it's similar in New Zealand, just based on how kind of our cultures are parallel in many ways. That menopause is seen medically, it's an interesting kind of like what verb tense to use, but has been seen up until recently and maybe even until now as this kind of pathology of the body, that it was only in the 80s that the last time that this was referenced showed up, that the aging female body was seen, medically speaking, by some as a defective, broken, useless, dried up male body, essentially. Is it the story that so many, yes, right? There are problems
So
here,
bad.
so many problems here.
So
the kind of like this informs the dominant narrative that menopause is this problem, and the problem is a problem that can be solved, particularly by masculine androcentric medicine. So we have that social discourse, and then I think we have the other narratives in there too, which are like women as they age become invisible, they become useless sexually, because they're not kind of idealized as this kind of like for their youth or for their bodies, and harder to objectify. They don't as clearly identify with or align with the cultural values. So we have these like real cultural barriers that get in the way of women knowing anything about menopause. And then if they do know something, typically the things that they know are disempowering, fragmenting, fear-inducing. So anyway, all of that to say, I found it really fascinating to look at a particular sample of women in my doctoral research who believed that menopause on some level went well for them, and ultimately was something that they navigated through into a new season of their life. And a few of the findings that we found from this study are from my research was one that women, even when they did well in the experience, felt like very uninformed, very unequipped, very undereducated. And even when they tried to seek out resources to support them through their doctors, through literature, there wasn't really much to support them. And so they felt that they had to kind of go it alone. Now, the other side of that was that they turned to each other. And that when women seek out information, I mean, women are incredibly powerful and resilient at finding what they need. I think women have always done this, like made a way for themselves. I don't think we should have to work as hard for kind of normal developmental biological transitions and experiences. But when they turned towards each other, that the connection between them actually served as this protective factor, empowering factor. We see this again in the literature that women who have places to talk about menopause with their peers actually see that they have fewer symptoms and they're less distressed by their symptoms.
Can we just acknowledge that for a moment? So women
Yep.
in perimenopause who talk to their peers experience fewer symptoms,
yep,
less negatively.
Yes, and they're less distressed about the symptoms they experience. So, which kind of like asks a certain question, because we like to think about menopause as this biological event. Hormones are changing, so this is what's happening to our body, here are these symptoms. But as soon as you start to say people are connected to each other and their symptoms are decreasing, that starts to highlight, again, that our bodies are not just matter. Our bodies are this tableau of connection and aliveness, and are the place where our social connections live out, where the stories that we learned about, what it's like to be a person actually impact our tissues and the things that we experience. So, I mean, we can return to all of this, but I just want to kind of briefly go over some of the other findings. What women reported was that they could trust the transition, and that they made sense of the transition by using other experiences of change in their life to help them understand that this was good and okay. That menopause.
Can we acknowledge that again?
I know.
The idea of trusting the transition, and that the transition is good and okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is a world of difference, even in the thinking now about menopause, and the conversation volume is rising, and it's so great. I still see so much fear and so much just that sense of being blindsided by my body is doing this thing to me, or my body is failing me or letting me down or out of control, in comparison to a narrative that would suggest I can trust the process, and I can support myself through this process and get somewhere good.
I think that one of the actual quotes from a woman in my study was, she was talking about menopause and perimenopause kind of like going through labor. And she recounted the story that a midwife had told her. She said, labor is like a rushing river. And what you can do is you can cling to the side of the river, and you can hold on to the little branches that you think are going to keep you safe and you can resist. Or you let go and you trust that the river carries you somewhere. And it's actually kind of the resisting of it that creates this, profound suffering and chaos and prolongs the experience and creates resistance inside. And so her idea was, I'm going to approach menopause the way that I approach labor, that I'm going to let go and trust the river is good. I'm going to trust that the river takes me somewhere good. And as a result, I don't have to fight it. I can join with it. I can participate. I can let it teach me something. I can let it take me somewhere new. And that's really what menopause is doing, yeah, I know, right? It is like, the findings from my research were that menopause is a biopsychosocial spiritual transition. It's not just a series of medical events, right? It is this whole person reorganization that ushers us into this new season of life. And our culture says that the season of life that you're going into is this void of nothingness. And yet women in my study are reporting they feel more connected to themselves. They feel more empowered. Their sex is better. I mean, this is like not something I could say, like replicate for every person everywhere, because I know sometimes there can be sexual challenges on the other side of menopause, but that sex is better, that they actually feel more in their purpose. And some women actually talked about feeling like, it feels like my life has begun. Like everything was a dress rehearsal. And now I've arrived into knowing who I am and not being afraid of who I am, and actually being able to like take up the space that is mine. I'm embodied, I'm empowered, I have agency. And it was actually through the transition that they got there.
Oh gosh, I want every woman to hear this, to entertain the idea that perimenopause is good. It is not without challenges. And for some, it's not without very significant physical, psychological, social challenges. But this idea that like puberty takes us into a brand new space, right? Where we get to breed, we get to have children if that's available to us or desire us. And then that season changes and we transition into a new season that has new possibility and hope inside of it. It's such a positive thing because actually if you're going to climb a mountain, right, or run a marathon or do anything of value where you feel this incredible sense of achievement at the end, there are challenges, right? There are blisters or there's hunger or there's aching muscles. Like the way I kept looking at it is I didn't take painkillers before I did my half marathon, the only one I've ever done, because I knew it was going to hurt at some point, but that was part of the process. There was also going to be joy and good stuff to see and people I was in companionship with along the run. And to feel like any pain or any difficulty is a sign that something is going wrong is such a difficult orientation towards pain. So when you were saying that perimenopause is you said a psycho, social, spiritual transition. Can you probably, for those who haven't thought about embodiment and disembodiment really cognitively, like sat down and gone, okay, let me think critically about this for a moment. Can you give us a bit of a definition about embodiment or your theories around embodiment?
Yeah. So my working definitions of embodiment are really informed by like leading scholars in the field, particularly Merleau-Ponty and Eva Perin. And the idea that I have about embodiment is that embodiment is just what it's like to be a body, what it's like to be in our body, what it's like to be connected to our body, how much we can connect, how hard it is to connect. And if we take it a little bit further, how much we know how to make use of and be in relationship with sensation inside of us, with our body as the place where our narrative exists about who we are, where our wisdom is, where our resources to face the challenges of living are. And so instead of the body being this obstacle to living, seeing our body is actually the place where living happens, and a place if we spend time and build connection with, that we can have more access to all of the goodness that's inside, the kind of the wisdom in a way of all of nature. In the same way that the tree knows how to grow and kind of bear fruit and reach towards the sun, our bodies actually know how to do a lot of the living, but we've come to be at war with our bodies. And so we have seen our bodies as objects to manage. I think that culturally we've been handed that story, right? Make your body a thing, make it a pretty thing, make it a thin thing, make it a white thing, make it a, right, whatever, like make it a thing that's desirable to somebody else. So we objectify our bodies, we dissociate from our bodies, we try to not feel, we try to not pay attention to the information. And yet our bodies are there all the time with information, supplying us with the tools for living, with the resources to face life and connection and hardship and to feel pain and joy right alongside each other.
So I am really excited. I am really excited about this idea of your definition of us as in relationship with and connected to our bodies, because our bodies are where we feel pain and we focus on that, right? But they're also where we feel pleasure. And we aren't alive without our bodies. So it doesn't matter how clever our brains are or how flexible our heart is. Without our bodies, this season is finished. So we've kind of got this really, like, it feels like a slightly messed up relationship with our bodies. And I even loved your definitions. You know, I look back at photos of myself, like how many women are going to relate to this? I look back at photos of myself 10 years ago and 20 years ago and think, what was I worried about? Like, I looked amazing. And does that translate into going, so I must just celebrate me now and love me now and say yes to who and how I am now? Or does that make me go, oh man, and then do the same thing and then do the same thing and then do the same thing? So I love your front lawn metaphor for women and their bodies. Can you hit me with that?
Yeah. So I like to think sometimes about our bodies as a home. And it's a useful metaphor for me because I think I'm so visually oriented that like actually thinking about this as it relates to our day-to-day living, we can picture it. It makes a lot of sense. If our bodies were our home, just imagine how ridiculous it would be for us to live on the front lawn of our home with this beautiful home inside that has a fireplace and, you know, some books stacked by the bed and a bathtub and all of our candles and photos on the walls and like our tools for living, right? Our cutlery, our knives, our cutting board, our barbecue lighter, the Band-Aids, all the things that we need. And yet so many of us have learned to leave our homes to kind of sit on the front lawn and then evaluate them. So we look at the paint, we look at like, oh, I need to do an update on this. And then it's really easy when we're on the front lawn to compare. Go, our neighbor's house, like, oh, look at this. It's got a better upgrade on the fireplace. They have a nicer yard. Like, oh, it's kind of like, obviously they're better than me. You know, their house is better than my house. And when we think about it that way, we can kind of see how ridiculous it is. Like to have a home with so much richness, so much aliveness available to us, the place where we make our memories, where we make cookies in the kitchen, and like have the big cries on the couch with the best friend and make love and kind of all the things that happen in the house. Think of how like much we miss out on when we're living on the front lawn. And so the parallel here is that for many of us, if our body is this house, we spend so many of our hours, we spend so much of our thought life, our time living on the front lawn. We're effectively outside of our bodies, looking at it from the outside, evaluating, judging, criticizing, seeing the body, critiquing, comparing, evaluating. And often evaluation is just worth saying, like, where did we get handed the rubric around how we evaluate? We didn't really come up with that on our own. We're kind of born
so the rubric's like the score sheet, right?
The score sheet that says like, oh, here's the standard. Like evaluation implies that we're comparing to something. Like where did we get that story about where we compare to? So we make judgments about our body based on these ideas that we're handed about what it means to be a body. And all of this keeps us on the outside, keeps us feeling like, okay, if I manage how the house looks, then I'll be good enough, then I can be okay. And embodiment is the work of starting to live back in the house. And why I love this metaphor, like there's so many layers to it. A lot of times when people get into embodiment, it's really easy to kind of like try to do embodiment perfectly. So we say to ourselves, like, I have to be perfectly embodied. What if I like was misattuned to my body? Or what if I ignored the cues? I was hungry, but then I couldn't feed myself because I had to work in that meeting or be with my kid. And we kind of get sucked into like doing embodiment perfectly the same way that we kind of try to do body image perfectly or appearance perfectly. And what I like to say is like in any normal rhythm of living, as was the case for me today, I leave my house. I go and I like adventure into the world, and kind of maybe that parallels us having like really incredible ideas or thoughts or imaginations or active dream lives or connections with other people where we're listening and paying attention to things on the outside. And then we come home at the end of the day and we crawl into our bed. Like, are we returning home? It's not, do I stay there perfectly all the time, but rather, am I allowing this to be the place where I do most of my living? That feels like my home base, where I keep all my precious things and where I return to as a way of feeling at ease.
This is so good, right? This is so good, because any message, if it's taken holus bolus and becomes like the only way, it gets twisted and turned.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you added to that metaphor, because we're not choosing between our body and our thoughts, our body and our feelings, our body and our spirit. It's yes and adventure and thoughts and feelings and our body.
Can I add something about that there? There's like two really interesting, like there's a scholar, Dan Siegel, who talks about mind as an embodied relational process. That mind, as much as we think about it as just our thoughts, like mind exists as a bodily process. And what are our bodies if not kind of the sum relational experiences that we've had about how to be in the world? So this is really useful to think about when we're also even just kind of deconstructing like how overly identified we are with thinking, as if mind is separate than body. Because what the neuroscientific evidence says is that actually there's 9 times more information going from body to brain than there is from brain to body. So when we think about what is mind is actually kind of the final product of what our body does. It's like all of this information and data about how to be in the world, about, just sensing and feeling and even things like balance. And like, I was talking with someone earlier today who had a heart issue, and it's not unusual for people who have heart issues to also have some anxiety, because it's so threatening for us if there's something wrong with our heart that our system is wired. We have a nerve branch that goes right from our heart into the emotion center of our brain, the threat detection center. So it's very normal when there's stuff up with our heart to feel anxious. And then of course we have these kind of anxious thoughts, and all of that is coming from an irregular heart rhythm. So when we think about thinking, we have to remember that thinking is actually a bodily process. A lot of it comes from what we notice inside of ourselves and how we perceive the world from our embodied location. The second thing that I wanted to add in there, which I think we probably don't think about very much as it relates to the bodies. Many of us see the body as separate from spirituality. That spirituality is something that happens out there, right? If we have a religious experience or have a spiritual idea or a theological idea, that happens somewhere else. It's a construct. If at most it's a mind artifact, or it's in some other realm. And what research about religious and spiritual experiences has shown us is that it's actually because we have a body that we have them. So when people are put in fMRI scanners to look at where in their brain they're experiencing, air quotes, experiencing God, or when they're kind of like having a real sense of connection to something bigger than them or wider than them, what lights up in their brain? Well, it's actually the part of the brain that feels experientially in the body. So for many of us, we've actually thought like, oh, my body is this obstacle to interconnection or spirituality or what's holy or what's pure. We're kind of like, even just like these ideas of what's mystical. And yet it's actually because of our bodies that we have spiritual experiences, that we have encounters with things that feel bigger than ourselves. Even if we were to say like, someone walks in nature and they feel the aliveness of the forest, almost as if the trees are breathing themselves, and they have this sense of like being overcome with awe and connection. Where does that happen? That's not an idea. That sense of awe and aliveness and interconnection is actually happening because of our body's ability to feel, to just have feeling, sad feeling, but also awe feelings.
Yeah, so amazing, because we've just come home from a break in Tonga, which was profoundly restful, because we decided to pursue rest in a generous and relaxed way. So we were generous with ourselves and chose relaxation consistently. So we snorkeled, which was essentially free, mask and flippers, and you swim out or you walk out or you kayak out. And a conversation my husband had with a he's nearly 70, 69-year-old guy who snorkels since he was 4. He said he gets into a meditative state when he's snorkeling. And so this idea kind of planted in my husband's being. And he said 2 of the times when he was snorkeling, he just relaxed and was fully present to where he was and just allowed almost all of his senses to receive just whatever was available to him in the water in that moment. And he said it was a moment of almost euphoria, that he felt so connected and so euphoric and alive, but it wasn't a pushing it wasn't, there was almost like a letting go that allowed that. And this, I'm talking about a very practical man here, a man who thinks, and he's logical and reasonable and reliable and calm. And yet he had this kind of profound experience that I would describe as spiritual. Yeah, just exactly what you said.
Yeah.
So cool.
It is so cool. Yeah, that our bodies can do all of the pain, the hard stuff, and the alive, expansive, euphoric stuff too.
Yeah, the awe and the wonder of the connectedness of everything, right?
Yeah.
And I guess as you're talking, I feel like you the work you're doing is an invitation to weave our body and our brain, or recognize the weaving that's within us, the interconnectedness of all of it. Can you give me some insight into how you as a woman have come to be embodied, to embrace yourself as a body, become a friend to your body that isn't striving for perfection or to get it right or to never do it wrong or
Yeah. It's one of the subtle theses of my book, The Wisdom of Your Body, which is that these places that we typically scapegoat as being proof of body's badness are actually these doorways into connection, like emotion, when our bodies kind of defy expectation around image, aging, pain, chronic pain, trauma. Like, there's so many things that happen in life that we see as these obstacles to connection to our body. And yet often, I experience it as if my body is kind of knocking on the door of my awareness, saying like, hey, pay attention to me. Like, I'm still here and I matter and we can do this together. We can do this whole thing together. So when I think about, there's obviously the kind of the normal day-to-day things, like, am I noticing sensation? Am I tracking emotion? Am I aware when that person said something, it didn't feel good, and actually I got tight, and I've been tight all day, and wow, when I connect that tightness of why I'm like laying in bed at night and my shoulders are tight, if I follow that all the way back, I realize that there's an injury that doesn't feel like it's quite over from that encounter. So listening to body cues, right? Our bodies are constantly communicating. I think that's important. But I think that the less obvious path here, or perhaps the thing that might be more relevant to this conversation about menopause, is that these places that our bodies typically get scapegoated are these portals into connection. So I live with pain. I've had a PTSD diagnosis, and it's not currently active right now. But for me, the acuity of the anxiety that was living in my body and the pain, this was resulting from a series of car accidents, the pain and the fear in my body, I didn't want to feel. And yet when I slowed down to feel, it was actually my body's way of saying, I don't think we're safe yet. I think it still might be happening. And all of this protection and strategy around trying to keep me safe, as if it's still happening, as if I'm still in the car, kind of like, and it's on fire and all the things, right? It's my body's way of communicating, this doesn't feel done yet. And so when I was trying to ignore and suppress that, it was taking me further and further away from myself, not just from the pain and the anxiety and the terror and whatnot, but also it was taking me away from the aliveness that supports me to face those things. So at some point there became an invitation to go, I'm going to go towards the emotion. I'm going to go towards the fear. I'm going to go towards the memories that are connected to that. I'm going to notice the pain in my back. And I'm going to start to have conversations with it. I'm going to actually befriend it. I'm going to apologize to it. I'm going to tell the parts of my body that think I'm still stuck in the car I'm so sorry you ever so scared. And to be able to meet these places that, we really problematize in culture, the pain, the trauma, the big emotion, the terror,
The
like
hot
we want that stuff to
flashes,
go
the
away.
brain
Exactly.
fog, the
Exactly. We want
rage.
it to go away to be okay and be in
Mm.
relationship with our body. And what I want to say is actually those are the way in. So what happens when we have the hot flash? Right? What happens when there's the brain fog, the vaginal dryness, the weight gain? What do we say to ourselves about that? Like, wow, oh honey, you're changing. Right? What are the things that we wish we heard at puberty that nobody said? Like, this is okay. You can trust this. This isn't a problem. Right? Might be scary and it might be uncomfortable and you might not know how to be with it and you might not have a lot of people you feel like you can talk to about it. But we all experience it and it's okay. And there's nothing wrong with you. And like, oh, sweet body, you're working so hard. How about that? Like, think about the acuity of temperature change and like what it's like to feel so uncomfortable in your body. Like, oh, honey, it takes a lot of energy to work this hard, to change this much. Like, I'm so proud of you. So to see these things that we even consider as symptoms, as pathways towards connection to ourselves, completely change this story of menopause from being a pathology management strategy into like a gateway for feminist awakening, embodied awakening, connection to others, compassion, trauma healing, like all the things that we never got before that we can get now. And we do that because it's challenging, not in spite of that.
That's so good. This is so good. And look, even what you're saying is challenging because the script for pain in our culture is take a pill, make it go away, carry on. The pain is bad. And I remember reading a whole book about pain saying if we live without pain, and there are people whose pain receptors don't work, they hurt themselves so badly. Pain is this incredibly important message that we need to trigger us to take action or to invite us to pay attention. So even as you're saying things like the symptoms of menopause and perimenopause, I remember feeling hot flushes and being able sometimes to be really compassionate about them. Like, oh yeah, of course, my brain is rewiring. Like, I make sense to me. And I had fear around brain fog because I talk and present as part of my living and how I earn my livelihood. And I was like, this is not right. If I cannot get the words. And yet I can see even that slowing down, inviting my brain to be just as it needs to be in this moment, the loss of energy. Like, I have less energy. And do you know what I feel overwhelmingly? A sense of relief that I do not have to keep all of the plates spinning, because I have done that for years and I'm tired. So it's not I'm tired and I'm giving up, but it's like I'm tired of that way of being that no longer works for me in this season. And I am turning towards a new season and I'm taking some of those plates and I'm popping them down. I'll just spin one or two or three if I feel like it on a fun day. And to be able to redirect my energy means I can say no thank you to this opportunity, or I don't want to do that. And I don't need to do that. That's no longer my responsibility. So I feel a sense of now that the less energy reality is a complete opportunity for me to do life differently.
Yeah.
But that is a transition, right? Like, there's a part of me that's aging and I'm like, do I let go? And is it called giving up? Or can I choose? Oh, today I feel like dressing up and putting on makeup, and today I don't feel like that. Today I'm bra free and I'm makeup. Like, I get to curate how I look and how I move through the world, right?
There's some scholars who, it feels kind of avant-garde actually. In 2002, Coupland and Williams, two feminist scholars, wrote a very significant paper about discourses of menopause and kind of looking at the societal stories we tell. And they found in their research 3 main stories we tell. One, menopause is a pathology.
And can you define pathology for somebody who hasn't?
It's broken. There's something wrong.
An illness.
An illness. Yeah, there's something like you're
It's
sick,
just bad.
right? It's a sickness. It's a bad
sickness,
thing,
yeah.
right? Yeah. So the second one is women saying, well, I kind of need to manage my menopause because it's still kind of a bad thing, but I'm not going to do it in the mainstream way that I was told. I'm going to kind of fight back, and I'm going to do it alternatively. I'm going to find different resources that connect me with that. And then the third discourse that they found was menopause as this emancipatory feminist experience, that it was a way of saying that I can reconstruct menopause positively. It's a rite of passage. It's a time of reevaluation of who I am and a sense of freedom for myself.
So emancipation is breaking free.
Breaking free. I'm liberated from this. And what's interesting about these discourses is that they tend to be sort of impacted by the experience that you have. Like, the harder the experience, the more likely a person is to go like, this is a real problem, right? If we can just imagine the most acute experiences of symptoms and whatnot, and maybe like life change that's concurrent. Like, sometimes around menopause, you also have aging parents and children who are in puberty, and there can be like, whoa, this is too much. So the harder it is, you're more likely to pick that, but also the more exposure you have to these more emancipatory narratives, the more likely you are to espouse them, the more likely you are to take them on because you know that they're a possibility. And so part of what the injustice around menopause is that when we continue to talk about it as this problem to be solved, we participate in creating a reality where that's the case, where we don't actually give each other and ourselves an opportunity to see it differently. When we look at this in the literature, this has shown up in like maybe 4 or 5 of my research studies at this point. Women can often feel shame about doing well because as women, we don't always have very good scripts relationally through which to tolerate another person's flourishing. It seems that so much of our bonding with each other has historically been around, I need to be self-effacing to not threaten you, or I need to join with you in the suffering of life. And what I don't mean around that is telling the truth about our pain in a way that brings us close, but the kind of like comparative diminishing of our bodies that we do, like, oh, you think your thighs are fat? You should see my thighs. And right, we like, I'm going to make you feel better and I'm going to connect with you over hating my body. And what we
common
need
enemy
to be
intimacy.
Able to do, yes, exactly. But it's so interesting in the research around menopause to create spaces where women can tell the truth about doing okay and doing well, not just because it actually allows them to own that that's their reality, but it creates more opportunities for other women to have that as a possibility. But if we're going to do that, we need to start being okay with other people doing well. And sometimes this is where the crux of it is for many of us as women is I have to actually have some degree of security to not feel threatened by your flourishing. And I have to know that your ability to do well doesn't take away from how hard things are for me or the opportunity for me to do well. Can we do connection with each other as women in a way that opens up the possibility of more wider, more hopeful social discourses without minimizing pain? And can we also tolerate somebody else's doing well, even if it feels like, oh, we wish we were there? Can we let them have that? So I think this conversation around menopause and embodiment asks us to rethink, how do we talk to each other as women? And how do we talk about our bodies? And can we be okay with someone doing well? And can we connect in deeper ways that are not just about, problematizing the flesh we're in?
Wow, so good. It's quite a lot, and I hear what you're saying, in so much as that minimizing that we do, and if we have a mindset of scarcity, which is that if you're doing well, there's less well for me to do. This idea that if somebody's earning more, they've taken up some of the money in the world that I can never get. So it's a mindset that I think we can inherit because we're constantly marketed to, and we have to quickly grab everything we need and hold on to it all. But this idea, because I think as women, if we lean into it, like if I have a friend who goes on holiday and they are doing well, I have chosen this mindset of, I am so stoked for them. I am so happy that they are taking a moment to rest or restore or adventure or celebrate, that in the loving of them doing that, that actually reflects back on me, and I get some of the joy. It's almost like that joy in them doing the good thing bounces back. And so it's enlivening. And I think you're right. We are nervous at times to say, hey, I'm doing well as women. That's a good whittle. That's a good challenge. I mean, interestingly, I have had mild symptoms and I've leaned into perimenopause, and I've done it without needing to go to hormone replacement therapy for myself. And I was just, but it feels like it's waves. It feels like it, it's eased off. It's all easier. And then it kind of compounds, whether it's social pressures and emotional pressures and physiological pressures. And I went to a friend of mine who is on hormone replacement therapy and said to her, I just feel like I need to go there. Maybe I should, even though I'm in menopause now. And she said, oh, you're doing really well. I think there are these other two women I know who they're doing it without the hormone replacement therapy. You can probably get through. You can probably make it. And I thought it was such a generous thing of her to offer me the option of, you might be okay. You might be well. And this is without judgment for anybody who needs to take hormone replacement therapy or for whom that has been a game changer and a lifesaver. It's just this opportunity to offer us this breadth of script and narrative. Oh, yeah. And I literally felt relieved and released, like, I'm not doing badly. I'm not failing. It was, I'm struggling. I'm having a moment, but I can lean into this as well, probably. And I just feel better.
I'm so glad that there was room in that conversation for you. It just makes me think about what it would be like if all of us as women could do that for each other. Like, oh, what's your path? Oh, that's your path. I trust you to make choices about your body. And I'm so grateful that you are doing well. Like, even just the other way for someone to say, hey, I'm taking hormone replacement therapy. I'm doing well. And to have, you say to them or me say to them,
that's so great.
Great. Good for you. Like, to not have to moralize these choices. And it kind of reminds me of other seasons of life, like motherhood and childbirth and things where, we compare birth stories and women say, like, I needed this pain management. And like, does that mean there was something wrong with me? Or I was able to do it without. Does that mean I'm better? And kind of really leveling the field to say, let's not do that to each other. Let's allow you to have needed what you needed and create the possibility that you can face what's hard. And I'll be alongside you as you do it. And let's look for what's right about us. And let's make space for the pain of what's hard about this. And we can do all of that together.
So good. Okay, we have so few minutes left. I'd love to read. I have got so many quotes from your thesis and your books here that we haven't done. But
Sure.
Becoming again the bodily self, you wrote, ultimately remembering our bodily selves, becoming embodied again, is slow work. It is compassionate instead of perfectionistic, communal instead of individualistic, process-oriented instead of achievement-oriented, and mutual instead of hierarchical. That is sort of a summation of what we've been talking about, that we do this journey together, that we don't do it comparatively, that we don't do it perfectionistically. Some of the things that I read in the early chapters of The Wisdom of Your Body were ways that we can re-meet our bodies and re-know our bodies and become more embodied. And they were what you called suggested directions to a new home. So that was like this idea that we can come home to our bodies. And maybe we knew this when we were children, when we were really little. And there were some phrases that you used. You sort of named the untruths and then you were naming the truths. Can you go through some of those truths about coming home to our bodies?
I don't have access to the book and I don't remember
Okay.
what I wrote. So I wonder if you would read some of them. Would that be okay?
I will read them, yeah. These are suggested directions to a new home. Once you've practiced the route often enough, anytime you leave, you can find your way back by heart. And as you said earlier in our conversation, it's okay to leave and it's okay to return home. And some of the phrases you suggest are, this is my body. My body and mind can be friends. My body is a resource. My body is resistance. My body is a sanctuary. Finding physical freedom as an adult means engaging in movement that feels comfortable and playful and allows us to be how we want to be. So I guess part of the practice of that is we can say those phrases, like start to live them and implant them. But you also talk about how you dance to become more in your own body. Like there are different ways that we can practically sort of find our way home.
And I think that what I often think about related to this, and I think it's informed by my clinical decision-making skill set as well, is like start with what works, start with what's available. And for many of us who have learned to live our lives organizing our way of being around our thinking, that introducing new ideas can sometimes be the way to start. So even this, like my mind and my body can be friends. Like, oh, what happens if I let that marinate inside of me and it becomes true and I live into that? But then for others of us, we have a little bit more capacity to tolerate a broader expression of movement or somatic experiences that allow us to come in contact with sensation and our body's voice in a new way. So starting with what's available, starting with what you know, starting with what's possible, from noticing when you're full, stopping eating, or noticing when you're hungry and listening, all the way to, oh, how do I want to move my body, and kind of putting on some music and just like expressing for the sake of connecting with your body's voice. I think that there's a wide range of possibility here. And that's part of why I wrote Practices for Embodied Living, is that it's meant to be this companion to the wisdom of your body, where it's just a series of practices. The whole book is just prompts and invitations and things to do to help people get more into their bodies.
Yeah. And I so love how practical that is. And I think about how free and accessible it is, in so much as you could play a song, close your bedroom door, move around, no harm, no foul. Yeah. If you don't like it, don't do it again. And if you like it, do it. Exactly. This is what I've bought all my girlfriends for Christmas, is Practices for Embodied Living, because I'm like, yes, let's do this. Hillary McBride, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your mind and body and spirituality with the Grey Areas audience and myself today. I'm going to refer people to some other podcasts you've been on so they can dip into your wisdom more in your own podcast, of course. I so appreciate it. It's beautiful, good mahi that you're engaged in, and I love that you share it with the world. And yay!
Thank you so much. And we did it. We're finally here.
Yes.
We did. We got to the other side.
We did
it. Oh, thank you for this conversation. What a gift.